His full name was Alan Matheson Turing. Bit on the nose that middle name, think what he spent all his time studying later in life. Born in Maida Vale in Paddington, London, on 23rd June 1912. Being born in Paddington, I immediately thought to try and make a joke about this, to say he was born there like the bear, or Photoshop his face over Paddington Bear, but my non-existent Photoshop skills killed that dream before it started. Turing later attended as a fellow of King's College in Cambridge, while there publishing a proof showing that some purely maths-based yes-no questions couldn't be answered by computers, such as the halting problem, which is if you set up a program with an input, will the program eventually halt when run with that input? Which in terms of algorithm, none exists that always correctly decides if a program will eventually halt with solely a given input, which is where the math side of it all comes in. During his time in Cambridge, he went up to the States and attended Princeton for a PhD in mathematics. This was probably the last bit of peace he got for a while, because by the time he returned to Britain, the Second World War had burst into action. Quickly, he began working part-time with the government coded cipher school, performing crypto analysis of the Enigma machine already, used by Nazi Germany to encrypt transmissions from prying enemies. The Enigma machine, in short, scrambles the 26 letters of the alphabet and typically use one person enters text on the Enigma's keyboard, another person writes down which of the 26 lights above the keyboard illuminated at each key press, which turns out to look like gibberish. But the Enigma works both ways, and so if you know how to use the code, inputting that gibberish will translate the message for whoever sees it, which seems like a simple thing to crack, but not when you factor in the millions of settings possible to set on the Enigma, all encrypting it in different ways, when only matching settings could produce a legible message. September of 1939 rolls around and the UK has declared war on Nazi Germany. The day after Turing had reported to Bletchley Park in Milton Keynes, the wartime station for the very same government code and cipher school he worked with previously. He was required to sign the Official Secrets Act, never able to share what he did at Bletchley to help the war effort without severe consequences. Headed up Hut 8, the section involved with cracking naval transmissions of the German Navy. With aid from Polish codebreakers and using a mock-up of the actual Enigma machine they had managed to create and share with the Allies to get a greater understanding of how it functioned, now, with hardware to get their hands on, finally Turing and his team cracked the Enigma machine. This gave the Allies the upper hand in the Battle of the Atlantic and later on the Western Front, and no doubt many times in between. Working at the National Physics Laboratory, designing the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE, in 1948, the precursor to the modern computer. I think the freedoms people in the community have today would have seemed far out of reach, I think, to him. Especially when these days around the world, there's attempts at pulling back rights for many within that community, especially concerning trans healthcare, just these past 2 years in the UK, his home country. Homosexuality was criminalised though at the time in the UK. He was prosecuted for that fact alone. The courts more than willing to send him to prison for it, but with a choice forced on him, he had chosen the, in comparison, preferable option, I suppose, of chemical castration, with DES instead. All this despite his major contributions to the war effort only because of who he was born as. And so he died the first week of June 1954, just 2 years later, in his home in Cheshire. At that time, it was ruled as cyanide poisoning and likely suicide, but the evidence also lined up with accidental poisoning, leaving his death an ambiguous note in his story. In 2009, after an online campaign, the Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, issued an apology on behalf of the UK for the way Alan Turing was treated. This is the end of our slideshow and presentation. Thank you for listening.